Hey guys and girls, Board now back with you. On this video I will be talking about Star Trek Picard Season 3 Episode 5. The episode is called Imposters, so I will be going into some spoilers as always. And this episode was really up and down, really iffy in some ways, but there were bits of it I enjoyed. And I just want to comment a bit on last week's, because I know last week's got a lot of positive response from fans, and some think it's the best episode of this show so far. And of course I shout all over it. People who saw my review or heard my review last week will know that. And I'll just say, if you like it, you like it. But it just wasn't for me. It just didn't gel with me, a lot of stuff they were doing in the episode. But if you like it, you like it. So I just thought that'd be worth mentioning, because this is a funny one for me, where I think it is a better episode just because that one I really didn't like at all. But at the same time, there's a lot of wishy-washy stuff in this one again, and there's a lot of very sloppy stuff. I didn't like the stuff with Worf and Raffi at all in this episode, really. Obviously, there were a couple of okay lines between them, because they have decent chemistry and Worf's always good value. But the stuff with them I just thought was really lame. Once again, the A-plot, some of the stuff with Picard was solid stuff and has maybe a bit more of a Trek feel to it. But there's some iffy stuff, especially with the shapeshifter stuff. But I'll say the highlight of this episode was Picard and his scenes with Michelle Forbes' character, Ro, who of course Next Generation fans will remember, so they've brought that character back for another rub of nostalgia. But I generally liked a lot of their scenes together, the chemistry, the spark, the intrigue and drama over it, the mystery of exactly what she was up to. Even though there's definitely plot holes you can pick in that stuff, at least it was very engaging, the way they gelled with each other, and there was some meaty interactions. It definitely felt like classic sort of Trek, one of the things we love about Trek, the conflict and the almost like watching a stage play with these two characters interacting and bouncing off each other. And it at least felt like there was some stakes on that stuff for me. It's always good to see Michelle Forbes. She's always a very watchable, commanding actress, and as it turns out, she wasn't a villain in this, but when it was playing up that angle, then she could have been then. It's certainly, she sells you on it, is what I'm saying. But Shaw is once again gloating from the peanut gallery, because he points out to Seven, Picard and Riker and Starfleet are on their way, and that you're going to have to deal with this stuff. You're going to have to come up with a good story and stick to the same stories. And once again, it's Shaw going back to Shaw of the first episode, where he is being very sort of comedic and slippery and ha type thing. And you would maybe question then he should take some sort of a responsibility in all this. After all, he did when he got injured, he assigned Riker to captain, and it's on his watch. It in many ways this stuff did go down under him, so whatever. But he seems to be disregarding that and enjoying their potential fate. So when Rose shows up, which is a surprise to everyone, because last time they knew she was a terrorist and had been indicted. She's there to question them, but she's also there to find a shapeshifter which is meant to be on board. And one of the things the episode does in a very heavy-handed way, I think, is that they implied that Jack could be a shapeshifter because of the cliffhanger at the end of the last episode. And I really didn't like the Jack scenes in this episode because they were really hitting you over the head with them, hitting you over the head of, oh, is he going to snap at any moment? Is he a shapeshifter? Is he going to kill innocent people? Because you kept seeing him having flashes of doing something like that. And it was just very OTT. There wasn't a lot of subtlety to it. So Seven has the idea to hide Jack at one point with Forbes' character on board looking for like a shapeshifter, which seems smart enough, but then it seems a bit pointless anyway because Jack just goes roaming after that anyway, just is doing his own thing. So it's like, whatever. So anyway, as I said, Ensign or Rowe, Lauren Rowe comes on board, and she's there to question them and implies that they could be up for treason. And it later turns out that's a cover because she's also looking for the shapeshifter, but it turns out it's a cover. But for a lot of the episode, it's played up like she's a villain and that's why she's there. And Picard and Riker's responses to this couldn't be any different, like, because Picard is like, oh, he's just pissed. He's pissed and like a terrorist has been allowed back, has been rehired by Starfleet and is like conducting this investigation. Riker, on the other hand, is just really chilled out about it. He couldn't be any more level-headed, and you sort of think a middle ground might be what's called for here, because it's like Picard is almost acting too much like an arsehole, as he has been for a lot of this season, and Riker probably is a bit too laid back about it. Maybe that's just Riker, but you sort of feel like he should be having some concerns over this, but I guess he just figures, hey, what are you going to do? They're going to investigate us no matter what. So Rose starts like interrogating Picard, and she says, let's go to the holodeck. So they go there, and that's when you get like a standoff, because like he's making her a drink and he pulls out like a phaser gun he's got, and she has one as well, and it's like this whole standoff. And that's when they start arguing and debating stuff. Also before that, Picard has had reason to suspect that she could be like a shapeshifter, because he's got like a cryptic message from Beverly suggesting then. Because another thing they mention is, how did the shapeshifter get on board when the scanners are meant to detect if it's like a non-human, if it's like a shapeshifter or something like that. And part of this, because Beverly's been doing the autopsy on goo, basically, on the goo from the shapeshifter, because we've got to give Beverly something to do, because frankly she's been doing fuck all in this series, I've got to say. But so it's just an excuse to give her something to do, really. And she barely has anything. She has a scene with Jack at the end, and she has this stuff, and that's about it. But at one point she messages Picard with saying it's something like they can also transform their blood to make it look like they're human and someone else. So that raises his alarm even more. And so they have this stand up in the bar. But I quite like what Forbes' character is thinking in this. It's like, I'll take him away to the holodeck, and that way I can reveal exactly what's going on. And I'm not saying all of the stuff, all the reveal and that is necessarily the most interesting, but I did really get into like the Rowe and Picard stuff, the chemistry they had, and the back and forth, the tension, and how she has to win him over, like she has to win his trust over. And that's what she does by the end of this scene, where she starts explaining then because initially she has this line about I defected all those years ago because Starfleet was corrupt, and that this group of terrorists like stood for the same principles as I did, and obviously Picard isn't going to listen to that. But we're once again running with this conspiracy theory storyline because Rose tells him that Starfleet has been compromised and it has been infiltrated by the shapeshifters at a very high level, and that she claims that they were responsible for the attack on the Academy previously. So Picard finally trusts her, and she later tells him she's left him with a skeleton crew, so he has to make sure like that they can trust him, or he can trust them, because they need to escape from under Starfleet reign because they can't be trusted. And there's a nice little plot detail with her earrings, because at first he questions that her earrings don't look like the right earrings for her race, and it turns out that's a whole plot thing, because later on, in a very flashy moment, I'll say, but it's revealed that she's left them because they've got like digital information, like a map of the whole conspiracy theory and the plans from like the powers that be, the bad guys, and it's a bit of a flashy scene because you've got all these like images flashing up on screens and stuff, but it's a nice little plot detail when revealed, and the earrings were brought up, and then it pays that stuff off quite nicely, I thought. But what ends up happening is then Ro is tricked by the shapeshifters, which I saw coming a mile off, because you get her security detail who take her off the ship and beam her onto like her shuttle. And from the moment they walked up to her and said, because they were insisting that she leaves, which immediately put me on like red alert. But like as soon as they walked up to her, they were looking a bit shifty, and I think because you've had all this stuff with shapeshifters and there's multiple shapeshifters aboard, it immediately made me think, yeah, they're probably going to be shapeshifters. So it was too predictable, that stuff. So they ended up screwing her over, like just leaving her on the shuttle and setting up these bombs. And she insisted that she didn't have time to discharge them. So she ends up sacrificing herself, like going towards the ship and exploding and dying. And now, because I'm not familiar with the character really from Next Gen and stuff, I'm not going to comment on this stuff too much about how this stuff is handled and whether it's like a satisfying way for the character to end or not, because I've not really seen the character. I don't remember seeing her anyway in Next Generation, so it's probably not for me to say if this is well handled or not, or if you... Because some Trek fans might think it's a bit cheap just to have her sacrifice herself in Picard, but I'll leave that for others to decide. But I did like the stuff with her in this episode. As I said, Michelle Forbes is a really, really engaging actress to watch, and she had good chemistry with Patrick Stewart, I thought. So those scenes were the highlight of the episode, in my opinion. But of course, they then have to persuade Shaw to go along with this stuff, like with the mission, which eventually he does, because they're like, well, look at the evidence. And then you get this thing where the shapeshifters are trying to frame them for what just happened with Ro, tried to make it look like it's like Shaw and his crew who did that. So it's so wishy-washy, some of the stuff with Shaw, because he lets far too much, even though he comes across as like a bit of a hard ass at times and then he doesn't really trust Picard and the rest of them. He still allows a lot of shit to go down on his watch. Like, he really doesn't try that hard to stop this stuff. So that's the whole thing. I think at times the episode is too flashy, as some modern Czech shows tend to be. So, like, some of the stuff with Jack and the shapeshifters. Also, just to comment on, like, the shapeshifter and shifters and what they're doing, it just feels like it's too much in this episode. Like, it's too much of a gimmick at this stage, because it just feels like it almost makes it more predictable and takes away drama and suspense, because it feels like it was so obvious that the security people were going to be shapeshifters in that scene with Ro. And then it just feels like too much of a gimmick and too much of like a magic trick, which they're sort of hitting you over the head with. And the sort of end of the episode is Beverly saying, "How did you know they were shapeshifters?" to Jack, because earlier on he finally killed a couple of people who it turned out were shapeshifters. And he just says, "I didn't, but I think there's something wrong with me." And that's the cliffhanger. So I've got the Worf stuff to talk about, the Worf and Raffi stuff. Now, you get a bit of sparring with them, and that's quite good fun. But once again, their plot is sort of plodding along a little bit, because it feels like they're just keeping it at quite a slow pace until they can link up with Picard and stuff. And Worf does talk to Picard and Riker in this episode, because he communicates with them over transmitters, and he then is asking about Ro, what happens to her, so he's obviously going to find out that she's dead. But yeah, the Worf and Raffi stuff I thought was really lame in this episode, mostly just because of the sort of plot it was, where they had to go off to another contact who Worf has, who they think could be connected. There just seems to be too many beats like that in the storyline. And they meet this guy, and Raffi once again is like very aggressive in like an over the top type way, and Worf is playing the more, I guess, like Mr. Miyagi style role, like the more, you know, like cooler head. But you've got this character, and he's played by the guy out of Fringe. That's where I know him out of. And he's good in that show, but yeah, like some of his dialogue in this episode of Picard was like way over the top, and I did hate him just keep using the words like illogical and logical. It just felt like a bit too much of a wink and a nod to like old school Trek fans. But this stuff I pretty much hated, because he says then he's like, he's got loyalty to Sneed, because Sneed was loyal to him. So because he was killed, then he's going to go after the people who killed him. And he starts like hinting that then he's a part of this whole thing with like the shapeshifter. And at first he seems to have them like kidnapped and at gunpoint. And they do this really like dumb thing where like he forces him and Worf and Raffi to like duel. And like in the end she stabs him. And there's this whole thing of like Worf is saying that this is like a worthy death. You are a warrior. Which feels a bit rushed to me. But I get then it's played as, oh, we're tricking him, and that's the problem. Like, it's just bullshit, because on the one hand, if he was really dead, then that feels like a cheap way to kill off Worf. But on the other, I'm not surprised that he survived. I saw it coming. It was a whole trick, because apparently he can manipulate his own heart. I don't know if that's a real thing, if that's been brought up before in Trek. Let me know in the comments, but that's how he survives. So he can make himself appear to be dead. So it's a whole trick so they can like get this guy and get information out of him. And of course he says later, well, that's logical because they're threatening to kill him. But yeah, no, it's just lame, that stuff, because on the one hand, as I said, if it turned out she had killed him, that's just really lame and cheap. But on the other hand, it's pretty predictable that he was really going to survive anyway. And also that just feels cheap because it feels like they're trying to trick us, the audience. And yeah, not in a very like convincing or interesting way. So either way, it's just very eye-rolly, that stuff. So definitely a weaker part of the episode. But about halfway through now the season, we're getting to the point where things are starting to come together and happening. I think I just have a problem with this show, like trying to be too dark and moody. I've mentioned this before. It's the sort of thing where it can be dark, like there can be dark moments like there are on a show like Deep Space Nine. I don't mind that stuff, but this just feels forced. Like it doesn't really feel like it needs to be dark. It just feels like it's just a stylistic choice rather than it making sense for the plot. Like they're just trying to be like dark and edgy almost for the sake of it, but they're obviously digging into like dark areas to do with terrorists and things like that, extremists. So up and down episode. There's definitely stuff I enjoyed in it. There's stuff the Picard stuff I pretty much enjoyed the majority of that stuff, and there's other little moments I enjoyed, but up and down definitely. There was plenty I didn't enjoy. So very middling episode for me. So that's my thoughts on the latest Star Trek Picard. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. And speaking of newer TV, it's a big month on the channel because I'm going to be reviewing season 2 of Yellow Jackets. When that premieres next week, I'm catching up on season 1 right now. So you can check out those reviews, and also I'm going to be doing season 4 of Succession, the final season. So look out for that and more TV reviews on the channel soon. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys again later.